Yeah, look, thank you, Karen and Belinda, and the International Council for Media Literacy for the award and the chance to speak to you today about what we've been doing since that award. I'll just acknowledge that I'm on the lands of the Awabakal people, First Nations people here, 2 hours north of Sydney. It's 6 a.m. and still dark, so I feel a little bit fuzzy. I have managed to have a coffee, but yeah, hopefully I'll be lucid enough this morning. So this is the project that we were given the award for. It's a project that's looking at how media literacy can help adults recognize and avoid misinformation online. So the project is asking, uh, are adults able to verify information online? We asked about the barriers, the practices that stand in the way of that. We wanted to understand how media literacy could help people to do this, and also how our public cultural institutions in Australia could work together to reach adults in Australia who want to develop their skills in this area. This is our fabulous project team. We're from 4 different universities, and we're working in partnership with 4 national public cultural institutions, including our national broadcaster, our National Library Network, our Museum of Australian Democracy, and our National Film and Sound Archive. So since we saw you, we've completed all our research methods. So we started with an adult media literacy survey where we were looking at people's practices, their needs, their interests, their attitudes in relation to their media use and media ability. And then we tested people's ability to verify information online. So this was a test where we gave people 4 activities and we asked them to use the internet in any way they wanted to work out whether what we were showing them was reliable and trustworthy. And then we did this diary study where over a week we asked 55 people to capture information they were seeing online and to tell us how they made a decision about whether it was trustworthy or not trustworthy. And then we did follow-up interviews with people. And the reason that we wanted to do this research is that there is actually quite ad hoc research in terms of the role of media literacy when it comes to addressing misinformation. And we find that there are a few meta studies appearing, but what they include is often very diverse. We wouldn't necessarily say that some of those things being included are media literacy, or fulfill a definition at least that we use in Australia. And what we can see is that when there's like higher quality, these are initiatives that have been developed over many years and they're sustained and they're longer, like 4 to 6 sessions. We can see that there's really good results in terms of those initiatives. But then the shorter initiatives where maybe people are just seeing, a checklist, for example, then we start to see more mixed results. And this is a real challenge when it comes to adults, because obviously if we're working in classrooms, we might be able to do something that's longer and more sustained. But for adults, we're, competing with really busy media environments and busy lives, and it's really challenging to obviously get an adult to commit to 4 sessions. So we really want to understand all of this and think about what we know about the evidence base and how we can contribute to it. So I'm just going to give 3 really brief findings because I actually forgot to start my timer, Karen. So please tell me if I do go over 10 minutes, but I don't think I will. I'll just briefly give 3 findings from the research. So the first thing that we found is that adults have a low level of confidence in their media abilities. And that's really true when it comes to any type of media production, very low confidence in their abilities. But it's also true when it comes to their confidence if they can check if information online is true or not. Most Australian adults are then not actually confident that they can do that. And then the second finding is that Australians are report that they're regularly seeing misinformation online, and they want action to address it. So they're not ambivalent about this. Sometimes we get that message that people don't want action. But actually what we found is Australians asked them what they wanted to happen about it. vast majority of adults want government regulation. So that's a good starting point for the project. But then finally, we found that most Australians don't have these online verification skills. Now, this was a bit of a shock, the results of our test. So I mentioned that we gave people real examples of online content, and we said, use the internet any way you want, and then tell us how you made a decision, how you fact checked this. And what we found from that test is that, I mentioned before that most adults aren't confident that they can check if information online is true. But what we found is many of those people who are confident, in fact, 40% of them who were confident that they could, actually demonstrated no skills at all. They performed 0 on our test. And in fact, only 3% of people scored more than 50% on this test. So what we can see is that overall, there's a very low ability. We actually drew this study, the design of this study, from the Stanford Civic Online Reasoning Test. They worked with us to do that, and the results are quite similar to the results that they saw in the US as well. So what's really great is people told us what they did when they tried to work out if things were true or not. So now we've got all this great data that tells us, what was standing in the way of people verifying information. So things like generalized cynicism, like they just say, I just don't trust anything from that source. And then things like making judgments on their past experience, or deciding if something's trustworthy or not based on how good it looks, if they think it looks credible because it looks like a news article or it looks like a good website. I mentioned the diary study, and I guess just wanted to say about that, it's a really rich source of data that we're still drilling down into. We got 1,600 submissions of people saying things they trusted or didn't trust. 20% were things that they thought were untrustworthy, and we focused on that at the moment for our analysis. And again, I think a surprise to me was that the majority of the things they thought were untrustworthy came from news outlets. So yes, things did come from community groups on Facebook and from advertising, but most of it was from news outlets. So that's a little bit of a surprise and shock, not to a lot of people, but it was to me. And so now we're looking at, these individual people and what were the things that they said were untrustworthy and what can we learn from that? And this is really fascinating because we can see that it's really not feasible for people to fact check all of these things. It's not reasonable because they're not high enough stakes. People are making very quick decisions about what to trust. And so what we're looking at was how can we help people with these trust and mistrust cues that they already have? How can we learn from how they're making these quick decisions, and how can we support people? Because in reality, that's what we need to do when we're on social media, because we see so many claims in, just an hour of social media use. With the funds that we got, I think it was $500 that we got for this award, we hired an illustrator who did a lot of different work for us, and we've been using all of those illustrations in our reports, and this is a main report from the verification test that I mentioned. And then finally, just to say that we're at the stage now where our partners are developing media literacy projects based on our research, and they're looking at different target groups and different areas, and they're all piloting at the moment. And so from there, we will move to developing a toolkit to help other people develop initiatives just like they have, while our partners will look at expanding on these pilot projects. So I will stop there, and thanks very much for listening.
Fascinating work, and I love the illustrations. Very nice use of our money. Thank you. So if we could open it up to anybody who would like to ask any questions, make any comments about the work. I know I'm curious about how are you gathering, where do you get the adults from, and what work, how are you having these longer sessions with them? In what space?
Sure. Well, for the surveys, we used a panel provider. And so that's a really large survey panel provider in Australia, because the first two surveys are nationally representative. They're weighted to be representative of the Australian population. And then we recruited for the diary study from those surveys. So in fact, we have the whole data set is the same people all the way through. So it's a very rich data set. And we wanted to have a diverse. We were looking for diversity in terms of age and cultural background, and in terms of languages spoken and things like that for the diary study, and similarly for the interviews as well.
Tanya, where are you hoping to go next with this? What is the next step in your research?
So the current thing happening at the moment is the pilot testing from our partners, and we're supporting that process. And then from there, we'll be developing a toolkit to help other organisations across Australia who want to develop initiatives to address this challenge. And that's from our research and also from our partners, but really supporting the partners to expand on their pilots, because they all have national reach, and the aim is that they
I think it
will reach significant amount of adults with it.
I'd like to ask a question about cynicism.
Yeah.
I'm finding it in many conversations across the people I know in the US. If you start talking about politics, everyone, many, let's say, are very cynical that somehow there's cover up, all the issues of fake news, is spoken about in many different ways. Where do you think it comes from? Why do you think no one believes that there is truth anymore?
I think it's pretty complicated, and I think trust has been eroded over a long period of time. And I think that it's really important that we recognize that, and we recognize that different communities have been adversely impacted in different ways by events that have caused that mistrust. And so I think it's actually a real challenge because in some ways, it might just be reasonable for people to write off particular organizations or particular types of media. And that's an easy way for them to say, they just say, I just don't trust anything from social media. I don't trust anything from that news organization. And on the other hand, what we can see is it does often lead people to the wrong decision. So they said things were untrustworthy that weren't in fact disinformation, as we're actually fact checking all these things that people were said untrustworthy. Not very much of it was actually disinformation. So it's a really challenging thing that we're trying to work through. What we can see though is that just focusing on fact checking and teaching everyone to fact checking, although I think is really useful and important skill to have, doesn't work. It's a complete disconnect with people's everyday realities and actually what's feasible in their lives. So I think that's the thing that we're really trying to struggle with here, to give people advice that's meaningful and useful, and that recognizes that distrust has not come from nowhere. And that I guess sometimes it's protected people in a way as well. So it is really quite nuanced and complicated, and I don't want to brush over that. And I think sometimes like fact-checking initiatives do that. They just start with the assumption that it's feasible to do a high quality fact check on everything, when it's just not. So I don't really have an answer to that. I think that's something that we as researchers need to dwell on a bit more, and sit with that complexity.
Thank you.
Michael has a question.
Yeah, I have a related question, and maybe it's to get you to speak a little more about that term trust cues. But what I'm seeing, or what we're seeing here in Canada, especially post-COVID and post the discourse of the globalists and the vaccine mandates, et cetera, like that I actually Naomi Klein, I think, says the great, the conspiracy smoothie, right? Like all the various pieces that go in. But one of the things that's happened and resulted is a profound distrust of legacy media. So most of us know how to recognize misinformation, and usually it's you click something and it's clickbaitish. You already see it. It's visually kind of like, oh, this is way too
Mm.
cluttered, way too crazy, too many pop-outs. That's probably misinformation. But yeah, what are you seeing around trust cues and legacy media and sort of the burning debates of the day?
Mm. Well, number one thing that comes out is people hate clickbait. They really hate it, and it really increases their mistrust. And yet we find even, you know, um, decent quality news organizations using it. And still, even though they've been told for many years that yes, it gets the clicks, but it doesn't get the trust. And so, I think that there's things here that we really need to ensure we feed back to news organizations, even though they've been told again and again by researchers that they get short-term gains from clickbait and long-term harm. So there are things like that, but there are other things that are really interesting that, again, could inform news organizations. So simply writing something off because it didn't have enough, people aren't going to click through when there's a social media post from a news organization. They have no intention of clicking through to the news story. They're making a judgment just on that post. And when that post doesn't include enough things that would award trust, they're just writing it off. So there's other things I think news organizations could be doing better in terms of how they use social media. So, yeah, I guess it wasn't really an intention to be learning a lot about what news could be doing better, but it's something that's just come out of the project, and that we will be building on and work in making sure news organizations are aware how they can be building trust when they are using social media platforms to disseminate news. But look, the conspiracy theory one is a really tricky one. We always said that this project was not designed for people who are deep down conspiracy theories and that different initiatives were needed for them, but it might be really good for the family of somebody who is believes conspiracy theories. So yeah, we're always very careful that the initiative is for majority of population, and that we recognise that different groups need different kinds of initiatives. But the trust in news organisations is low in Australia. It's been decreasing over time, and I think that's really interesting insights as to why people are distrustful of news and what organisations might need to do to win that back.
Just to say that here in Canada, I don't think this conspiracy theory thinking is marginal. I think it's actually become quite mainstreamed. So it's not sort of tinfoil hat. And so the distrust of the legacy media means distrusting, the news of the day, basically.
Yeah, I don't know if we're quite at that stage. We have enormous trust still in our public broadcasters. I don't know if that's true in Canada as well. And yes, there are people that don't trust our public broadcasters, but still, that when we look at trust studies, they're still one of the most trusted sources of information. But certainly it's happening here and as well, that declining trust. I'm not sure that it's conspiratorial thinking around news organizations, though.